Hi everyone, welcome to our weekly webinar where we showcase works of various architectural firms. And it's a pleasure to have Biome Environmental Solutions today as part of our presentation. Sharat and Anurag are here, and it's a pleasure to have you everyone here. Now on to one firm which has been an inspiration for a lot of people on sustainable architecture, Biome Environmental Solutions Private Limited. I would like to talk a little bit about Biome and what they've been doing. Biome Environmental Solutions is a Bangalore-based design firm focused on ecology, architecture, and water. The office's diverse team includes designers, architects, civil and mechanical engineers, and urban planners from various parts of India and abroad. The designs are undertaken by various members of this team in constant collaboration with each other via group discussions and exchanges and periodic meetings. It was created by the 2008 merger of Chitra K. Vishwanath Architects and the Rainwater Club. Both organizations have operated since 1990 and bring their distinct talents to this new firm. Design is a highly personal process, and we place great emphasis on client interactions to ensure the final project incorporates the vision of sustainability with the client's aspirations to aesthetics, functionality, and budget. So Chitra Vishwanath has been one of the mentors for a lot of youngsters, including me, where you look at their work and try and follow some of their footprints of what they're working. And definitely Vishwanath with his Rainwater Club, and famously known as the Zen Rain Man, has been at the forefront of understanding water and exploring water sustainability in Bangalore especially. Today's speaker are Sharat Naik and Anurag Tamhankar, who are both directors and senior architects at Biome. Sharat Naik finished his Bachelor of Architecture in 2002 from Manipal Institute of Technology, and then finished his Masters from Switzerland, Chur Institute of Architecture. And he also interned with Roger Bolshorst in Zurich, and then in Biome since 2004. Anurag Tamhankar is also an architect from Shivaji University, Kolhapur, and did his MTech in Sustainable Development and Climate Change from CEPT Ahmedabad, and interned with Chitra Vishwanath Architects in 2006, and then has been involved as an architect at Biome since 2008, and both serve as directors of the firm. It's great to have both of you here sharing your journey of working with Biome. So I think I will not hold on to you and the audience further. Over to you, Sharat and Anurag. You can share.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. So we will be today looking at an idea as such, and we'll be looking at this idea from different projects, what we have taken as an approach there. So the idea is building as a quarry. So we'll be talking about 3 projects, how we've got this idea involved into it, how the idea started a few years back, and then how are we taking it forward into the initial design process itself when we're looking at our new projects. So to begin with, we'll talk about the project which is a school in Bangalore. The project is the Emilia. So the site was located in the south of Bangalore. It was a flat land and was surrounded by some apartments and a warehouse, and all these were part of it. So we had a development to two sides, and to the other side, which was to the east, we had a flat land coming in there. This land was flat land, but it was also a low-lying area. So the development happening around it which was going on there with apartments, and as the Sajapura Road kept on developing quite a lot as we were working on the project as well. And there was a lot of development going on, and uh, as the built spaces were increasing, we were also looking at the surface runoff of the water increasing, and given this was a shallow land, we also had to look at how the water was going to be managed in the site as well as from the vicinity of the area. So we had this kind of a context where to the north of the site, we had apartment coming up. To the east of it, we had an empty land. To the west of it, we had a space which was a part of the same property, but it was used like a farmland. And to the south of it, we had a Okay, we had a go down coming in there. So this was a warehouse over there. So looking at this kind of development happening in the vicinity, we thought that it would be a good idea to take an approach which is more of an introvert design, where the a building looks inside the space. So that is how we came about this land. So the plot was of about 15,000 square foot, out of which we had a space where we were looking at about 10,000 square foot of a built up. So the client came up with a brief that they wanted a kindergarten and a primary school where they had an initial school in Guwahati, and they were now moving their base or expanding their base towards Bangalore as well. So Rhythm, the client, going to head this school over here, and had this philosophy on which he had been studying and working on, which is called Reggio Emilia philosophy. So this was developed in a municipal corporation in Italy, in a village, in a town called Reggio Emilia. So this was post World War II, that the whole community was looking at redeveloping the entire development and how we look at the education. So all these aspects, they were completely reinventing how the things should happen. So the Reggio Emilia philosophy talked about how in a child's development, or as the child's education progresses, how we have different contributors to it. So it looks at the parents being the so we were looking at this Reggio Emilia philosophy, where you have the parents as the first teacher of the student, and you have the teachers who are like collaborators and they co-learners, and you have peers where the children learn from each other. So these were the three main aspects of the Reggio Emilia philosophy, beyond which it also talks about how environment plays a major role in the development of the kid. So that starts becoming their third educator. So the environment, kids start learning from the vicinity, how things are happening, what's going on in the vicinity. So they start looking at all these aspects into the educational system. So looking at this philosophy, we started working on the project. Along with it, the client's father, who was also the director of the company, he had this inclination towards Vastu, and they were very keen upon following every minute detail of Vastu in terms of where what things should go. So we had a Vastu consultant in the beginning on board. So the way we had looked at is right from the site's entire topography, how we're going to modify this topography to make sure that we are completely compliant with the Vastu. So looking at all these things, keeping these things in mind, we had to go with the rectangular footprint, and the locations of the administration were to the southwest. The northwest had the toilet block. Entrance was to the northeast with the water body. And we also had the recharge well with the sump tank to hold about 50,000 liters of rainwater to the northeast. The kitchen came into the southeast corner. So these were defined by the Vastu. So looking at this and taking cue from this, we also developed how the roof was going to slope, which would slope towards the north and have the highest point to the southwest. So based on these parts, we started developing how we can further develop the internal parts of it, given that we were restricted with the footprint or the complete structure of the building, we started developing how we can further work on the internal parts of it. So as environment or overall the community or the neighborhood is a very crucial part in the development of a Reggio Emilia philosophy, we took an example of a square or a piazza in a city, and the whole design developed around this piazza. So you have the central space which becomes a community area or where everyone comes in as you enter. And then in this public square, you have all sorts of interaction between peer-to-peer, between the co-learners and the students. So you have these activities happening and every classroom opening into the piazza space. The next part of it, then we started looking at was the kind of development we are going to have was an organic development. The Reggio Emilia philosophy also talks about the kind of fluidity or the flexibility in the spaces. So the way they will use it, the teachers or the students, they would like to have that kind of a flexibility into their classrooms. They will have these different types of interactions which will happen one to one. They will have a circle where everyone is equal and we are all talking about this in group studies. Also, they will have the instruction-based studies. So the classrooms were also defined to have these three types of spaces in each one of them. So the initial study was working with all these organic forms, how we can do it. It was also supposed to be in two phases. So the first phase was to have 4 classrooms, one early childhood simulation center. So an early childhood simulation center is about where the kids who are really toddlers come in, and they come in with parents, as parents are the first teachers of every kid. So they come in and then the educator or the collaborator, they have this kind of an interaction going on. So there the kid gets familiarized with the school, with the environment there, with the people who are coming in. So this simulation center where we have it, it becomes a part where every kid comes in and begins the journey in the school. So you have those, we have 4 classrooms happening to the south of the building, and we had an atelier. An atelier is a school. So this entire school revolves around the studio, that's the atelier itself. And every classroom also has a smaller space where people can do all the arts and crafts and the way they develop their projects. So all that can happen in each classroom as well. They have a dedicated space for it. But beyond that, we also have a space which is completely dedicated for clay workshops, your art, the painting, and the sculpture making. So all these works happen in the atelier part. So that atelier becomes an extension of the piazza space itself. So we have that becoming a central portion of the design. With this, the next idea to incorporate into the design was about how we look at learning, kind of a curriculum system where kids are learning under a tree, and how we can look at this whole part, or how we can take that kind of an idea and incorporate it into our design, looking at this kind of branching of the structure what we have. The structure of the building was developed based on the trees branching. So that is how the truss came about. And given we were looking at a time frame where we had to quickly finish the project, we also started working on the things which are in terms of design as well as in terms of construction happening in parallel. So the structure was designed in a way that it can be done separately in a different location and can brought in into the building. So the approach of this building was that the walls are separated from the roof. So that way the walls can happen in parallel and the structure for the roof can also happen as we are working on it. We had this entire facade which was to the north, that was designed as a part with a kind of a assembly with different materials. So we had glass, pine wood, louvers, and perforated sheets coming in. So the whole The choice of the way we had this fenestration happening was based on the activity which will happen at that level. So to the proximity of the ground, we had the perforated sheet coming in, so you have a light breeze coming over the kids. When on the upper level, we had a glass from where you get in the light where you're working on. The mid section, which is right below the mezzanine, we had louvers provided over there, so that way you have the hot air escaping from the upper portion. The mezzanine spaces were created or integrated into the design as sleeping spaces for the children, because as the school ends at around 1 2 p.m. in the afternoon, some of the times the kids have to be there in the school till late in the evening, till the point the parents come and pick them. So to have this kind of a sleeping space, each classroom had a mezzanine space which was to be shared between them, where the kids could go in the afternoon and have a sleep space over there. So that was their sleeping area. So at that same height also we had louvers where we would get in air. The mid section from there was made with pine wood, so you don't have the direct sunlight coming in as the kids would be sleeping in that area. The top portion was again done with a perforated sheet, which would allow the hot air which was coming from the roof to escape from the top portion. So these are some of the pictures of the spaces. So we also had as a brief a cafe space into the design. So this cafe space was also part of the brief from the clients, because that is where the interaction happened, and the people or the society starts getting involved into the school. So post the school hours, the space becomes a semi-public space where people can come and have interaction, and it still retains its life as the school ends its day. So the central piazza space is also let out to people to have plays, they can conduct some workshops. So those activities start happening. And this cafe which is introduced in the school keeps these places open, and everyone can approach the space even after the school hours. So the spaces were, apart from the classrooms themselves, there were filter spaces, there were spillover spaces where the kids can come out and play in the environment. They can even learn in the environment. The Reggio Emilia philosophy doesn't have specific sets of tools like the other kind of Montessori schools have, the particular equipments with which the children learn. But in Reggio Emilia philosophy, the kids actually learn from the environment. So a stick lying around can become a music instrument, it can become a tool for the kids to play. The trees become so the trees become part of their learning. So the entire environment becomes part of their curriculum. So these spillover spaces give the kids an access to the external spaces without having the barriers coming in between. The paper tubes were used as the division, given the volume of the building was high, but at the same time, the scale of the kids who were going to be the users, the primary users of the school, was going to be a challenge. So we looked at the partitions which were coming in, or the divisions which were happening for the classrooms, happening at a different level. So the paper tubes which were used as the partition material allowed us to have these varying heights, and at the same time they also are lightweight in material, so if something falls or anything, the kids won't get hurt. So that way it enabled us to use the material in a more fluid and a flexible manner. So this was the central space where all the activities happen. The kids have their activity tables, small activity spaces. The idea of using the paper tube went ahead into the furniture design as well, and we looked at the paper honeycomb boards for the furniture. The furniture is now so popular with the kids that the kids and the teachers themselves also start making these furnitures with tables, chairs, and that becomes a part of their study or their exercises as well. This is the mezzanine which happens on top, and you have a staircase connecting, and it becomes also kind of a notional division between two classrooms. This was the toilet area with the skylight and a very short, like a kids scale kind of a toilet. So this building was, as a part of Plans B, the site available for the project was going to be available only for 5 years as they were taking it on a lease. And the design, what we were looking at, or the building, what we were going to build, was going to last for only 5 years. So yeah, so we'll come back to Atelier, but what we'll do now is we'll go through a couple of past projects because many of the thoughts or the guiding principles on how the structure for Atelier was designed lies in the learnings from these projects. So the question which was asked when we had to design and build Atelier was, after 5 years, is this what we'll be doing? Because or would it be this? So this is both these pictures are in Hebbard, construction debris filled on low-lying land. So it's both economic waste and an ecological waste that one is looking at here. So one asked these questions, and here we're quoting from Cradle to Cradle by William McDonough, asking whether the materials you choose to build, can they, after the useful life cycle of the building, become biological nutrients? For example, this rural home, its earth goes back as earth again, non-polluting, or can it alternately become a technological nutrient, which means it comes back into building or some sort of a productive use, right? So what we'll do now is we'll take you through two past projects. So this particular drawing that you're seeing on the screen, this is a project, it's a farmhouse for a couple in very close to Yelahanka. The clients are Sushma and Anand. So we did this project between 2003 to 2006, I think. Right, so it's a 6-acre farm of guava trees. And when they came to us, the previous owners had built, you see here, 1, 2 buildings, and then there was this poultry shed. So this was how the structure was. The typical poultry shed standing on stone kuchas or stone pillars. Kuchas is how it's locally known, and steel trusses and asbestos slabs. And then stone chapti is what you see in this picture, becoming the side walls with tarp sheets. So the call we took then was, I'm going back one slide, is that first decision was to where to build. Now we did not want to disturb the farm. The poultry farm was not something that they wanted to continue. So we decided that we build in the footprint of the poultry shed. And while doing so, because now this particular poultry shed, you see, it's a simple assembly of materials. There's no rigid construction per se. So it was fairly easy to harvest material from that. You see the lot of stone which has come out from this. And as far as the design goes, the two ends of the poultry shed, which is a 276 feet long structure, had a pakka structure. So we decided that we rework the footprint. So that's what you see here, the building getting marked once the shed was dismantled. Right? So we developed this design where we have at one corner the part of the old structure remaining. This portion uses the old foundations, and then we fill in the space between. So the brief required that the family wanted 2 homes, one for the parents, one for themselves, and spaces where they can work out from, where they can work from home. So Anand is an entrepreneur, so he wanted a home office, which is this portion here. And Sushma was a filmmaker, and she wanted one theater space where she could screen movies. So that's what you see here. So now the whole approach to construction took this thing that, okay, now we've got a lot of material from the old structure. The clients used to have a house in the city which they sold, and a lot of the old windows came from that place. But the material necessary for the walls came from site, and this is a sort of approach in most of the projects, that you design a basement space which gives you the earth for construction. So what you see here is the cross section of the home theater and Anand's home office. It starts going
underground slightly, so it's partially underground. So the earth we got from this has been used to build the entire house. So this is a picture taken a couple of months back, the house as it stands. So you see there are a lot of material in this. For example, this stone is new, but you see the old structure here. But when we look at the inner pictures, I'll take you to the outer pictures first. So it's a very, how do you put it? It's very, uh, yeah, it's quaint for a house, 270 feet long house. But the clients accepted the idea, they understood it, and they say the children enjoyed the most, the long corridors. So that's how you come in. Now you have the carport in between and one house on the left and one on the right. And these are the inner spaces. But what you see here, the truss to hold up the new roof comes from the old structure. A lot of the stone walls that we see here, the old windows, they are all reused from the previous structure, which was on the plot and part from the other home that they had. So these are the different spaces which have come about. And so this picture you're seeing is Anand's home office, and where it starts stepping down into the home theater right at the back. Right. So yeah, I mean, this slide should not have been there, but anyways, it's there. So these are the questions that we ask in our projects. That cities are predatory in the sense that a lot of material comes from the hinterland and from places far away, as far as China and Europe, Africa and Australia, which is largely the world. So what we ask is, can we look at a different possibility where cities are not predatory, but they're a part of the solution, and we look for resources within? So what one says is, then you look at old buildings themselves as quarries for new material, right? Beyond that fact, the whole idea of the basement, what you see here, you are seeing data from 6 houses that we've designed. The first 3 have basement spaces, the other 3 don't. So what we also call this process is a collaborative, cooperative process of design. Us being architects and doing multiple projects in the same city are now aware of some client needing a basement and having a functional use to it, but some others can't have a basement for whatever reason. But you can create these linkages. So what happens is, in Mini's site, for example, the basement yielded 149 cubic meter of soil, whereas what is needed is 55. So we connect them to, let's say in this instance, Uma's house, where she gets the soil. So they are all not too far from one another, these projects. So if you can't have a basement space, can you create the linkages as architects? Can our role expand to larger than, let's say, just making a design, but you create these connections and create a collaborative process? Right, so that's one of the things. But here, what we're looking at, this is a quote by Tennyson, and we're going to another project, a house for the Raghavans. This is in Chamrajpet. So this is the house as it stood. Large plot, 100 by 80, I think, and the house itself had been built over time. It started with a 2-room unit in the front. The family expanded, and as their needs increased, they kept adding more and more. So over time, the house stopped meeting their functional requirements and also had a few structural issues. So when we came into the project, Mr. Raghavan had this clause that no material from my plot should go out as a waste and pollute elsewhere. So we were put forth with this certain challenge that we had to use almost everything. So what happens now is that you have to look at this project with a different lens. So this was the house and some pictures of as it existed. So you see Madras terrace roof. So these are teakwood beams, old doors, right? So we proposed as per their new requirements. So they wanted 2 homes. Mr. Raghavan wanted 1 home for each of his daughters. So, but what happens is the whole process now of taking down the whole, the old structure moves from being a demolition to a dismantling of the house. So just like you separate your household waste into biodegradable and non-degradable, and then that from plastic to glass, you now start taking the house down in parts. So what you see in this picture is you have brick which has been retrieved from the old building. There is concrete which has come again from the roofs. The steel, we harvested it, but then we had, this was old steel and our engineers did not accept it, but we got a monetary value and that went out for recycling. And similarly, the other waste like surki and the foundation came out as stone. You had the wood, the steel. So all these were separated at source, if you would call it that. Beyond that, this had to be processed. Now the concrete had to be broken down into smaller aggregates. So this was a particular challenge. We did explore setting up small crushers, but it was prohibitively expensive, and setting it up in the heart of the city was not a proposition that one could go ahead with. So all this had to be manually done, right? And then one also came across another challenge, which was weak soil. So we were lucky with this, that we had access to good engineers who knew alternates of construction. So Professor Yogananda, Dr. Venkatesh and Pramod, they came up with this solution that you can now make wells. So the red circles you see here, these are all dug wells, a kind of a pile foundation, into which, so this is the picture you see of construction. You see the processed aggregate now created here. So using this, we create new concrete and pour it into these wells and lay a grade beam over it, and that takes the structure above ground. So that's pretty much the process. Once you concrete, you get that, you cast the beam. So also what happens is you have to now think on the go. The old house, because it had smaller spans, and I think they had done sand piling as well, used a stone foundation. But now here you had concrete as debris, which is coming up. So now that goes in as foundation. So the old foundation is now the walls for the house that you see. In the facade, you have the stone wall, which used to be the foundation of the house. The stone ties which are in the foundation is the new staircase. You see part of it here. These are the old bricks, which have been reused again in this building. So that's the house which as it stands now. There's only one departure from the design is we had the tinai or the sort of sit out independent of the house. They eventually got it attached to the home. Right. So these are some pictures. So again, you can see all the stone has some signs of it having been underground at a certain point, and we've left all those things as it were. This is the finished house that one is seeing. So this used to be the grill over the main door, which is now the grill for the skylight. So a lot of it we have repurposed as is without making any alterations. So this is the house on the lower floor that you're looking at. So this is a question that one asks a lot in our work, that what happens to waste, what happens to debris. Yet another problem which we see is of plastic. It's a lot better now, but in our earlier projects, we would collect plastic in the neighborhood and it goes down and it's in a foundation. So as long as the building stands, the plastic is there, non-polluting. One picture of a filler slab of computer keyboards, which is before e-recycling came in as a concept. Right? And also the linkages we had spoken of connecting people with basements to people without basements. So you can apply the same thing. So here, these are two ongoing projects. What you see on the left is a house which is being taken down in Vailikagal. And on the right is a school for mentally disabled children. So again, we create these connections. The old windows from here now become the facade of the new school. Right. So these two projects sort of got us thinking that now if atelier is to be taken down, do we really go this way? Because we also would have observed through Raghavan's that it's a lot of work, it's a lot of effort to reprocess material. So we asked this question when we had to design atelier, that do we go down that way? So Anurag will continue from this point.
So taking this as a challenge or as a starting point for the design, we started looking at every component of the building from the perspective like what happens to this component at the end of its life, the end of the building's life. Can we look at a building that can later on just get disassembled and then you use it for new structure, or a structure which is exactly the same into a different location? Can you pick it up and plonk it in a different location? So we started with the foundation how we can explore different types of foundations and the plinth beams. So we came up with this idea of using the chapdi stone, which is the stone slab available in Bangalore. If we can make use of it into the plinth beam. So what we did was to connect the columns what we had at intervals. The in between portion we had a plinth beam tie which had one kind of an arm coming out, and with that the plinth beam was holding the chapdi stone in between. So given that this was a waterlogged area, as I mentioned earlier, we had to raise the plinth by 5 feet. And when we were looking at it, the in-between space between the plinth or the column to column space, we had to retain the soil. So these chapti stones started acting as a retaining wall or a retaining surface for the soil which was filled in this structure. So that was just kept in and was held together by the RCC plinth beam. So at the end of the building's life, you remove the soil inside, the soil filling what you have, and the chapdi stone will come as it is. So you can use it as a new material itself, like what we saw in, say, an example of Sushma's house or even in Raghavan's house. So the walls, the way we were looking at, we restricted the use of mud blocks into the structure to a bare minimum possible, just to ensure that the paper tubes, what we were using, which were again tied together as an assembly, are not coming in contact with the water when they're mopping the floor, where some water spills onto the floor. So the walls were restricted only to a space where you wanted that gap to come between the paper tubes and the floor. The paper tubes were tied together with nuts and bolts, and then at the bottom they were fixed with a metal assembly. So you could take each of the paper tube out, and then it will turn into a panel. You remove the screws and the nut bolts which were put in it, and you can use either the paper tube or you can use that entire panel in a different location. The facade was again designed in a modular way. So the structure which was to the external face, that entire enclosure or the envelope of it was with smaller modules which were again welded together in a taka or a single weld. So that way when you remove it, you can remove it with a single hit of a hammer. So you don't have to cut or do a gas cutting, so in which you will lose the complete length of the member or you will lose a lot in the cutting process. So this kind of a construction approach also was part of the entire thinking process. So you have these envelopes coming in. The tree structures were themselves designed. So the entire roof was held together by these 8 tree structures, which were the metal tree structures. So these structures supported the roof, and then the purlins for the roof which was coming in. Yeah, and so the assembly was also made in a way that it was a prefabricated A-frame. So every frame was fixed to the central arm, which was the main column. So it was fixed with it in a nut bolt assembly manner. So at the end of the life, you remove this bolts and you can use the entire A-frame for your purpose. The central column remains without a structural damage as you are not cutting it. So you can use that central column as well as a structural member in future. So you don't have to go through a way of recycling, because while you can recycle the steel, but when you do it, the structural integrity of it is harmed. So you can't use it as a structural member in future. So this way, when you remove the nuts and bolts, the member remains intact and you can use it in different ways. So the facade again came with the pine wood panels, which were packaging woods, and then that became a kind of a module for using it. The roof was fixed with the bamboo ply. So these bamboo plies were also used. So the assembly was done only with the screws. So you remove it and even the roof will come off completely. So that way the component right from your roof till the foundation, everything could have been removed and dismantled, and you use it as it is when the building's life comes to an end after 5 years. But yeah, so that is how. While you do have these kind of ideas going on, at the same time, you also have to see how you can make it work, and you need to work further a lot more onto the joineries details. So as a process of the design, you need to work out on every junction how it is going to come, where each member is going to come and fix, because most of the components are prefabricated, so they can happen in parallel, as well as you can remove them easily. So these joineries were worked out in the office, so we can be sure of the kind of junctions we'll get at every point, and that is how the entire structure came about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful journey of taking us through those three projects and the whole storyline of how we can get into a circular economy of materials. Wonderful learning. That brings us to the end of the session today. Thanks, both of you, for this amazing session, and Bayom for that wonderful journey of introducing this idea of building not just as a finished product, but as a quarry for new materials, for creating that whole circular economy. It was an amazing journey. Thank you both.
Thank you, Vijay.
Pleasure. Thank you, sir.